It's time for ROTD Weekend. I've gone back and forth about whether I want to talk about politics on this podcast with this big presidential race going on, and I've mostly come on the side of no. I mean, even though I know that many of you who listen to me talk a lot know that I'm very involved in political campaigns. I do a lot of volunteering. I've spent 2 entire weekends recently writing postcards to moms in Florida who are less likely to vote to encourage them to look into things like reproductive rights and childcare and who might be best for them for those issues. So I'm like handwriting all these postcards. That's what I'm doing with my time. So many of you know that, but like, do I want to talk about it in a huge deal where, this is a space where we talk about cooking? And then, I just realized that one of the things that's been bringing me so much joy watching this campaign is how much they actually talk about food, or really more about cooking. I talk about this all the time that, so many people around the world love food. Loving food is pretty normal, but loving cooking, like loving the process of cooking, of making good food yourself, that is something that I connect to. And so, when there's that clip of Kamala Harris explaining to this woman, like randomly, they're waiting to go into some theater or something, and Kamala Harris is explaining to her how she makes collard greens. And I'm listening and I'm like, you know what? This woman really knows how to cook, right? And like the look on her face when Tim Walz tells her that he doesn't put any spices in his tacos, she's just like, you don't add anything? Not a little chili, not a little, And then I think the thing that just made me smile the most, just in my own like nerdy cooking girl way, was, okay, so I was listening to Doug Emhoff, her husband, Kamala's husband, being interviewed by somebody, and the person had asked if she really is as good of a cook as people say. And Doug's like, oh my God, she's the best cook ever. And oh, she does this chicken. It's the best. It's like the best thing I've ever had in my life. And I was like in the middle of doing dishes or something while I'm listening to this interview. And me, I like stop what I'm doing. I'm like, wait, the best chicken you've ever had in your life? The best thing you've ever had in your life is this chicken? Well, now I need to know. And so off I go to the internet and I'm Googling for Kamala Harris's chicken recipe. Okay. And I found this link on Newsweek. I'll link to it for you. It has her recipe at the bottom. And so I'm getting to this recipe and I'm reading through it. And in the ingredient list, okay, so part of this recipe has you put this chicken that you're roasting into the oven. It's like rubbed with rosemary and thyme and lemon zest, like under the skin and over the skin. And it goes in the fridge overnight. Like you can just taste this: garlic, rosemary, thyme, lemon zest, salt and pepper, under the skin, over the skin, overnight. And then you roast it. And as it's roasting, you pour white wine into the roasting dish. And I'm like, oh, that sounds good. I usually pour broth or stock in there. I'll try wine sometime, of course. And then I look back at the ingredient list to see if she says what kind of white wine to use. And it says white wine, inexpensive, room temperature to avoid cracking baking dish. And my heart just like soared with love. Like, yes, a person who knows this and is advising us to make sure that the liquid we add to potentially a casserole dish is not fridge cold when it goes in, because some dishes will crack. And that this person running for president knows this just made me so happy. I know there are more important reasons why we should vote for one person or another, but like understanding my life, having done similar things to what I have done, having a real connected interest in feeding families, all of that kind of thing matters to me. And that it's so clearly real because she knows about making sure the white wine's not cold when you're going to add it to that baking dish. That matters, So I guess I have talked about politics a little bit here. You know what I believe. I just think the cooking part of this is pretty fun, and I would be sad to not have brought up that this has been delighting me as I've been seeing it. And I guess this is going to be my reminder to you all to make sure that you get out and vote. Make sure your friends and family get out and vote. And you know who I'm voting for. If you are considering voting for Harrison Walz, go and check out what they believe in, what they stand for. A little sanity, a little connection, a little empathy. It could really make a huge difference to all of our lives here in this country and really in the world. Now we will change the subject. We're actually switching to talk about a different country. We're going to be talking about France. Today, my guest is Molly Madigan Pisula from Vanilla Bean Cuisine. And Molly spent some time living in France recently and is here to tell us about her cooking and shopping experiences. Let's listen to my conversation with Molly from vanillabeancuisine.com. Hi, Molly. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Christine. It's great to be here.
I am really excited to talk with you specifically about the time you spent living in France. You went with your family, right?
Yes. My husband and I and our two kids who were, I guess they were teenagers at that point, but young teenagers.
And you were there for how long?
We were there for 2 years.
Wonderful. And so you have a food blog, Vanilla Bean Cuisine. You cook and develop recipes like I do. I'm mostly curious if you discovered or learned anything different about your approach to cooking while you were there.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I love French food. I've always loved French food, and I love pastry. So I actually had done a pastry chef certification before moving to France. A long time ago, 20 years ago. And I've always loved that. But that's sort of like the image you have in your head of French food is you go to the patisseries and there's all of these beautiful pastries and they're all very complicated. But I have to say, moving to France and kind of experiencing daily life of living in France, you're not baking complicated pastries at home. You're not even eating those complicated pastries on a regular basis. And I think one of the things that I didn't really know so much about French food is that it's very, very seasonal. And the markets there are wonderful food markets that are like every day in Paris, you could go to multiple farmers markets that are, they take over a few city blocks. You can get whatever fruits and vegetables are in season. You can go any day of the week, multiple places, and they're all fresh food. And a lot of it is local, seasonal farmers that are just, nearby who are coming in with their goods to sell. And then people are, shopping at the markets and bringing that food home to eat. And so it's a very different mindset than, what you have here in the States where you go to a supermarket and everything is available any time of year that you want to make something. You can go to the produce department and find it. And in France, that is becoming more true, at least in a big city like Paris. There are supermarkets and you can find non-seasonal food, but still the culture is to embrace what's there and every season to make foods that actually are, locally available and are grown nearby. And I just love that. And it's not really the impression that I had going in of, French food. You go to a French restaurant and you're getting this very complicated, rich flavors, which is all wonderful and a part of French cuisine too. But for a regular French person, it's much more, it's a very different style of eating. And it's one that really appeals to me. So that is one of the reasons I loved spending so much time there.
I have so many follow-up questions to that. First of all, just the comment that I know what you mean about the markets being so seasonal, and it has always frustrated me where I live in the States, at least, that so many of the markets are not seasonal. I not just the grocery stores, but I can go to a farmer's market and buy, bell peppers when bell peppers are not in season, or we don't even grow them, that sort of thing. Whereas actually where I lived in Toronto, there was a wonderful market where in the spring, there were just herbs and lettuce. That's all they had at the market. And then
certain times of the year, it's rough out there.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. did you notice, like, could you see the difference while you were there? Like, you're at the market, you get something great one day and are disappointed or excited by new things. Was that like really obvious right off the bat?
Yeah, definitely. They have great seasons in France. I mean, it's a place that has four distinct seasons, although I don't know. Winter's a kind of a weird season there, but they do have four. And so the produce really does change and it changes pretty quick. And so I definitely noticed right away. We got there in, I'd say mid-July, and I was like, "Oh, this is fantastic. There's everything, there's fruits and vegetables and all of the summer produce." And then, but you'd notice like, okay, a certain type of strawberries are in the market this week. And then the next week, those would be gone, but a different kind would be there. And, they'd be from a different region in France, or they'd be from, a slightly different style that grows a little later. And that was the same with, with plums, with tomatoes, like they're different kinds, and they would kind of come in at different times, and it would be like, oh, this is the whatever tomato season, and everybody would have those tomatoes, and then the next week they would be like a little different. And maybe not everything on a week to week basis, but certainly within a month things are changing. And so you kind of have to get in, like if you love something, like, okay, well, I'm getting all these tomatoes while I can, because I know they're not going to be there in 2 weeks. And yeah, it was really noticeable. And that was maybe one of the first things that I noticed, like, oh, hey, this is a little different than what I'm used to, even in the farmers markets here, as you're saying.
Yeah. So did you find yourself cooking differently? And I want to say like, or do you think you started cooking like a French person? Do you have insight into like, were you cooking differently? And did you like meet people? Do you know like that they were doing something similar? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I did start cooking differently, partly because of the food and partly because of the kitchen. French, we were lucky enough to have a almost American sized refrigerator.
Oh, geez.
It was not American sized, but it was big by Parisian French standards. So, maybe half the size of a normal American refrigerator.
I want to stop now, and we just talk refrigerators for a second, because I need to know. So I was in Belgium for over a month this summer with my kids, and we had a very small kitchen with one of these refrigerators. It is, I don't even know how to explain the size of it, but like the size of like my parents' old television, like small, you know what I mean? and part of it was this tiny little freezer, and there was no other freezer. And I did not know how to shop or cook for us. Like I would be like, I go, there's these small grocery stores. They're not big grocery stores. I'm going to this little small grocery store, and I'm going like every day, and we need to have snacks and we need to have food. It was like a completely different. I didn't end up cooking as much as I planned to, because I couldn't I'm sure if I'd been there long enough, I would have, but like I couldn't get into a flow.
Yeah.
So that just the size of the refrigerator was something that affected you also. It's not just me.
Yes. Yeah. And because it really does mean that you have to shop frequently, because you just can't fit the stuff you would normally fit in there. So I was going to the market or to the grocery store almost every day, because it just couldn't make it work any other way. So that was part of it. And then the size of my oven was teeny tiny. So, I couldn't do like big sheet pan meals, like no way, like no sheet pan is fitting in that tiny oven. Yeah. So that was different. So that was just kind of I had to really like rethink, how do I do this? And it did take a while. I definitely did not have it figured out in the first month.
Did you find, like, I ended up feeling like it seems like a good idea if you have to shop every day, you're going to use things. I felt like I was wasting more because I couldn't, and maybe that's just what you get used to, but I couldn't like figure out just the one day and what we needed for the next day. And I felt like I was being much more wasteful. I really did.
Yeah. I can see that. I was trying to plan like 1 or 2 days ahead, what were we going to make? And then really trying to stop myself from overbuying at the market, because, then it would just go to waste. So that did take a little while to figure out. But, the other thing I would say about, changing how you cook, and I don't know if I was cooking like a true French person or not, of course, but I did have the people who we rented an apartment, which is where we were staying. And this apartment, the people had left a French cookbook, like a one of those, like you can make everything. It was in French, but it was like a kind of like an easy meals traditional French food cookbook. And so I would go in there and kind of look at what they were doing with you could search for, zucchini or whatever and see what kind of recipes were there. And so that was really helpful to me because I tried to use that to help me figure out, because I knew I would have like the dishes I needed. Like, the set of dishes is different from what I have. So I would know that like, oh, okay, I can make this in this kitchen. And so I tried out a bunch of those recipes and they were great, very simple, but very flavorful. If you're getting great quality stuff at the market, it's almost always going to be delicious if you treat it well and you cook it well. And the other thing I would do is I would go to some of the vendors at the market were meat vendors. And so I used to go to the chicken vendor who was fantastic. I just loved them so much. And they were very chatty. And so I would look around and I would watch what people in front of me were buying because sometimes I would look at things and be like, I have no idea what I would do with that. Like it's a cut of meat that I don't normally use or, so I learned a lot from just sitting in line and like watching what people bought and then hearing their conversation with the vendor because they would always talk about like, oh, what are you going to do with that? And, and people would go back and forth. And so I would buy something and I would say to the vendor, how would you cook this? And they would tell me like, oh, well, you just put it in a pot. You're going to add some garlic. You're going to put some onions and, put it in the oven for 30 minutes and it's done. And so I loved that. So I would just ask vendors all the time, like, how would you, even if I knew what I was planning to make with it, just to see what they would say. And I really got some great ideas from that. So I really love that as a method of learning how to cook like a French person.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. They definitely, they should know and would know. And then you're listening to those conversations. And I know what you mean about the cuts of meat being different. Like you think that it's going to be the same. Chicken breast, chicken thighs. No, there's not.
Yeah.
It's so
and I couldn't find ground chicken anywhere. Like nobody does that. So there were some things that like I was used to cooking with that I just couldn't even find.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And so you were talking about how the preparation ended up being simple. I'm curious if you've brought a surprise recipe for me today, and is it simple and French? That's what I'm hoping. I guess if it's not, I won't be too disappointed.
Yeah, right. It is simple and French.
Yay! So. Okay, what are you telling us about today?
Okay, so I am going to walk you through a French yogurt cake.
Oh.
So it is not seasonal and vegetable oriented, but this is kind of like the baking side of the simple French cooking, which is, when you talk to French people, like they don't make the fancy desserts that are in the patisseries because why would you? You would just go buy them because they're beautiful and pastry chefs are making them and they're wonderful. But people really do bake in France, and they are baking simple things, simple cakes, simple tarts. And that's kind of a common thing that, French people, everyone from the people in the countryside to the people in the big cities, like they can make a basic cake, which I'm not even sure I would say that about people in the US, like that there's a tradition of sort of making a basic kind of cake or tart. I don't think people have that knowledge.
I think like cake mixes to a certain extent, and maybe like brownies or like a banana bread. I feel like there's some stuff that like, I don't know, you and I are different from a lot of the world. My son just made a batch of pumpkin chocolate chip muffins to take to school yesterday. And he was able to do that. So I'm like, okay, if my kid can, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's everybody.
Right. Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting thing to learn about French culture.
Yeah. Especially like they make like the lemon tarts, tarte tatin, like that kind of thing that are like beautiful and lovely, but simple, so simple at the same time.
Yeah. So this is my version of a French yogurt cake, and it's really easy to make. And I make it all the time. And it's one of those things that I will make and, invite people over, and people are like, oh my gosh, it's, this is so good and so simple. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's even easier to make. So we should all be making these things on a regular basis.
What's it called in French?
Well,
Gâteau
tell
de...
you, the word for yogurt in French, like, is probably my nemesis for like weird things to pronounce. It's like yaourt.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a gâteau à yaourt,
Okay.
which like, I am just that word. My French is okay. It's pretty decent, but that word just gets me every time.
So
So
it really is called like yogurt cake in French.
yeah, it's called yogurt cake.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. And the reason it's called yogurt cake is so in France, in things have changed a little bit, but in the past, like yogurt came in these like little glass cups, which I love. They're about like a half cup size, but you would get this container at the grocery store of or at the like dairy people in the market, 4 6 little yogurt cups, and they're like little glass cups. And I actually took some home with us when we came home because they're so cute. I love them so much. You can put like little flowers in them and make little bud vases with them.
Oh.
So they're super cute. But that's like what most of the yogurt came in for many, many years. Now there are different sizes and some of them are plastic, and you know, in the supermarkets you can get different ones. But this classic glass yogurt, people would use it as a measuring tool. So the French yogurt cake, if you'd start with the yogurt in your glass pot and you'd dump it in, and then you'd use that cup to measure your flour and your sugar and your other ingredients.
It's the
And
best.
so it's so easy. So, you know, little French grandchildren would learn, you know, this is how you make this cake. It's, you know, 1 cup of yogurt and it's 2 of flour and it's 1 of whatever. So I did not do that for my recipe. I put it in cups because people don't have those lovely yogurt cups. But I just love that history of it because it really shows you, you know, how people learned to bake in the past. I mean, they weren't using recipes or using measuring cups. You know, they were using what they had and they were building these really beautiful, simple cakes that are great.
I love that so much. I love, you know, you sometimes come across an old cookbook. I was looking at an old Canadian one for this tart recipe that we make, and it literally says, add a walnut of butter. And I'm like, that must mean like the size of a walnut. What does it mean?
Oh, funny.
But yeah, so yeah, the different measurements, different ways of communicating the measurements, that's all part of the culture too. Like obviously everybody knew what those jars were.
You meant by a yogurt cup. Yeah.
That's perfect. Okay, so it has yogurt in it. It's not just the yogurt cup that's used to measure. Where do you start when you're making this?
Okay, so so this is a no mixer cake. You can just use a spoon.
Nice.
But you do have to separate your dry ingredients from your wet ingredients.
Okay.
So I normally start with the dry, and in sort of a medium-sized bowl, I put a cup of flour, a half a cup of almond flour, 3/4 of a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons baking powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I usually use like a kosher salt for that.
Why do you use the almond flour in there?
So this version of a yogurt cake, and you can do many different flavor varieties, but this one is kind of a almond flavor because I'm going to put some almonds on the top too.
Okay.
So I use a little bit of almond flour that just helps with like this little light nutty flavor. And almond flour, when you bake with it, gives this really nice texture to cakes. It makes it really moist. And it helps give you a long shelf life. So after you make the cake, it's good for several days afterwards because that almond flour just keeps it moist. And the yogurt does too. That helps too.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you would therefore recommend, even if you weren't going for the almond flavored cake, if you were doing this one as lemon or something else, you would still do the almond flour?
I would put it in there. Yeah. I mean, it's not a strong flavor. So, you know, it's fine with any other flavor variations.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's great to know about.
Yeah, so I would just put those, whisk together those dry ingredients, set them aside, and then I get another bowl, a little bit larger, and I'm going to mix my wet ingredients in that. So in there, I'm going to put half a cup of yogurt, and I just you want a plain yogurt, not a flavored yogurt. I normally use Greek yogurt because in France, like the regular yogurts are thicker than they are here. So I don't know. Sometimes I will, at the Greek one, I just think they have a better structure to them. So I normally do Greek, but you can do any kind of plain yogurt. It's only a half a cup.
Would you recommend using a low fat Greek yogurt, or you would always go for the full fat?
I normally do the full fat. I mean, It's only half a cup. And I feel like the richness you get from full fat is really, I don't know, I think it's really great. So, I mean, you could use a 2% or 4% or whatever, but normally I do the full fat.
Okay, great. Okay, what's next?
Okay, so you got your yogurt in the bowl. You're going to add 3 eggs, a half a cup of olive oil, and half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And again, you're just going to whisk and you're going to try to combine that. Sometimes the olive oil and the eggs and the yogurt will kind of look a little bit broken, but if you really whisk them up, it's fine. You're able to incorporate the oil and it just gets creamy and lovely. And then you take those dry ingredients and you dump them into the bowl with the wet ingredients and you just stir until it comes together, not over stirring. You don't want to over stir your cake because that can make the texture a little more tough. But you want to pull it together. Comes together really nicely. Oh, I should have said, I always prep my pan before I start doing this. And I use for this recipe a 9-inch circular pan, like a cake pan that I just do one layer with. So this is a 1-layer cake. In a 9-inch pan. And so I will put a parchment circle on the bottom. So to do that, I take a sheet of parchment and then I just trace around my pan and I cut out the circle. And then I put a little butter on the bottom so that I can stick down my parchment paper. And then I butter the sides of the pan. And that just helps it come out. But I don't know. That's something I learned in pastry school, and now I don't do cakes any other way because it's just so easy to get them out when you have a parchment circle on the bottom, so you know it's not going to stick.
You're not worrying about it at all that way. Yeah, for sure.
So I've got my pan prepped and ready, and so when the batter is done, I just pour it in to the cake pan, and then what I do is I take about a third of a cup of either sliced almonds or the those blanched slivered almonds you can sometimes find. And I just sprinkle them on the top of the cake, the top of the batter. And one thing I love about this recipe is that I haven't like pre-toasted the nuts in any way. They're just raw. They're just going on the top. But because they're on that top layer, when you bake the cake, they get just like a little golden brown on top. And it's like you toasted them before. So it's a step you don't need. But I just sprinkle those on the top. And then I pop it in the oven. I think I put it on 350. And then you bake it for about 30 minutes. And when you look and it's like lovely and golden brown, you can test it by, seeing if the top kind of springs back when you touch it gently and you pop it out of the oven. And that's it. It's such a great cake because you don't need to frost it, which is one less thing to do. You have the almonds on top, and then I will usually take some powdered sugar and just kind of sift it over the top. And I'll take whatever berries are in season and I'll put those on top too. But you don't have to. You could do it without the powdered sugar. You could do just powdered sugar. You could do more berries, but I love it.
Would you do the powdered sugar after it's cooled, like when you're serving it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let it cool for, 10 minutes or so. And then I would unmold it so that it doesn't, sit in the pan. And if you really let it cool off, it's harder to get out. So I let it sit for a little bit and then I'll just go around the edges with a nyife, tip it over, flip it back and let it cool on a cooling rack.
On a rack,
Till it's totally cool. And then I would put the powdered sugar on.
Yeah, no, that and sounds so simple, but it's moist, right? It's just this really moist, lovely.
Super moist. Yeah. And it goes, for everything. I mean, you could serve it at a brunch. You could serve it for tea time with a cup of coffee. It's fantastic. It's not, it doesn't feel super heavy or it's just not a lot. It's just a nice light slice of cake that is just goes with everything. And then because you can, change the flavor profile so easily, you can just add lemon zest, add lemon juice. You can do a lemon glaze on top to make a citrus cake. You can do that with orange juice and zest too. You can add, it's fall flavor season. So you could put in like cinnamon and nutmeg, cardamom. You could make it more of like feels like fall kind of cake and do like a maple glaze on the top. It's lovely. So it's just a great base recipe to have in your repertoire. And you can really change it around for whatever you have, whatever season it is, whatever you have on hand. I
I
love it.
love it. I love how simple it is, but also like very French, and the story. Like I'm not going to get over the yogurt jar behind the
Yeah.
whole thing. It's so great. Molly, if people want to find you online, see more of your simple French recipes, what you're up to, where are they going? Where should you send them?
Well, I'm at Vanilla Bean Cuisine. So my website is vanillabeancuisine.com. I'm vanillabeancuisine.com or Vanilla Bean Cuisine at Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I'm VB Cuisine.
Oh,
I'm all around. But yeah, probably Instagram and my website are the best places to find me.
wonderful. Everybody go and find Molly, Vanilla Bean Cuisine on Instagram for sure, and the website. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful, Molly.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Just so great in the theme of, people who love cooking, that Molly and I are like nerding out about like the culture of how things are measured. I love it. And I love that this French yogurt cake was made with those little jars. So beautiful. So great. Make sure you check out Molly, vanillabeancuisine.com. And she has Vanilla Bean Cuisine on Instagram and social media also. Now, as to what I am making this week, I didn't update you on the hurricane. It didn't really hit us. We had our phones and weather radios set to wake us up in the night if there were any tornadoes or any really bad flooding or anything going on, and nothing woke us up. We slept through most of the wind, which is crazy. I know lots of other people were woken up by it, but we were not, and we had no damage, and we didn't even lose electricity. I know that there are lots of people who were affected much more seriously, and lots of places from the previous hurricane and from Milton. So, my thoughts are with them, but I am also very grateful that we got through it all okay here in my community. And yes, that means that I am back to testing recipes. I am having a bit of a lighter week in terms of testing this week. There's just a lot going on. It's homecoming week at my kids' school, and they're both in drumline. So there's just lots going on with that. And maybe recovery from the hurricane prep. We had to empty out the entire pantry. I have this big understair pantry, and that is our safest place in a storm. So we empty the whole thing out, and then we have to put everything back in after if we didn't have to use it. So there's just lots going on, keeping it a little bit calmer this week. I'm just testing 2 recipes, or working on 2 recipes. One is for some crispy Brussels sprouts with bacon, and this is like a 2-step cooking process, but I'm trying to do it all in the oven, where you cook the Brussels sprouts first so they're soft, and then you smash them down, and that gets you these crispy edges when you roast them later. And I want to cook the bacon in there all at the same time, so that the bacon fat gets used in part of the crisping, and so you don't have to dirty an extra skillet and all of that, right? And I'm also working on a recipe for mac and cheese that uses evaporated milk. And the reason it uses evaporated milk is because evaporated milk has a higher milk protein content than regular milk. And so you can get away with kind of just adding the evaporated milk with the cheese and stirring, and it emulsifies without needing to do a roux or cornstarch or anything like that. So what I'm actually trying to perfect is a ratio for this version of mac and cheese, so that no matter how much pasta you want to make, you will know how much cheese and how much evaporated milk to use. So I am working on the ratio and testing that it works with the different amounts of pasta. And so that is what is going on in my kitchen this week. As to what is going live on the sites this week, we have a new recipe on each website. On Cook the Story, we are doing a glazed slow cooker ham. I love this for if you are having ham as your second protein, you've got a turkey in the oven and you want to also cook a ham, this is a great way to do it in the slow cooker. It doesn't end up looking as pretty as an oven roasted ham, so that's why I'm a little bit ambivalent about it, but it tastes amazing and is a very convenient way to do this. So that's going live on Cook the Story. And then on the Cookful is those air fryer apples. I have told you about this. It happens a lot at my house, and I'm not sure why. why, that the apples tend to start to get a little like shrivelly before they get eaten. I think it's because I leave them on the counter, not in the fridge, to like encourage them being eaten, which really does work like at first. And then people get bored of seeing them and don't eat them. And then I need to find ways to use them. And, I don't have a huge sweet tooth. I don't do a lot of baking. And so this is my solution. You basically slice the apples, core them, slice them, put them in the air fryer. They kind of dry up a little bit, but they also toast a little bit. And then you can just add a little bit of maple syrup and cinnamon, and they are delicious and just such a quick and easy way to deal with that particular situation. Oh, those apples are about to go or aren't like looking so nice. Just toss them in the air fryer and you've got this great snack. So that is going live on the Cookful. And I am telling you about that in more detail on this podcast, Recipe of the Day, this week as well. The air fryer apples are on the list of things that I'm talking about. There's also a little pork chop love going on. Oh, a really fun chocolate dip. I already said this. I don't have a huge sweet tooth. I don't do a lot of desserts, but I do love really quick and easy sweet things, especially like to serve for others who might like dessert, but I don't want to fuss with it. That is this chocolate dip that I'm telling you about later this week. Lots coming your way, something new every single day. And I will remind you that if you are liking this show, if you like my recipes, make sure you're following me on social media because I am constantly sharing delicious things there. And, I just realized that I wanted to let you know this because I don't think it's true of everyone. I actually am doing all of the social media myself. And this has not always been the case. I've had different parts of my business, different years where I have hired this out and had different people for my team or contracted. And about a year ago, I started doing it completely myself. I do have somebody edit the videos, but I take the videos, somebody else puts them together. I do the voiceover, I write the captions, and I respond to the comments also. So if you are commenting on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, it is me who is responding. So yeah, if you want to see all of my recipes, what I'm sharing there, and interact with me, social media is a great place to do it. I am Cook the Story on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, also on Pinterest. That is Cook the Story. Thank you so much for following me there. Tell your friends and also share those recipes. If you see a video or recipe that looks good, share it. That helps your friends and family who follow you to get those ideas. And it helps me because every time it is shared, that grows my audience. And so I always really appreciate that. And I appreciate that you are listening. Thank you for being out there. And a big thank you to Molly from Vanilla Bean Cuisine. Thank you for being an amazing guest and sharing that yogurt cake recipe. I'm not going to try and say it in French. I'll just say yogurt cake. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great weekend. Let's get cooking.